Game over, yeah. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Easy right, maybe.
Spinning bird kick.
And worms are back in service. All these stories and more coming up on today's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. When the Dave's away, Neil and Chris will play. Hello, Chris. Yeah. It's you and I, just like the old days.
Yeah, just like, I don't know, 2 years ago? I don't know when it was. 10 years ago, 2 years ago.
I got a cup of tea. What are you drinking today?
I've got a little bit of wine because I've just got home from work and it's one of those Mondays. But I'll follow it up with some water to wet my whistle as we go through. So
it's always odd recording at different ends of the day at the same time. Your day ends as mine begins.
You probably couldn't get away with some wine or a beer or something. Well, you could. I'm not going to judge, but, you know, whatever.
It's been a busy week this week, and I must start by congratulating Lee from More Fun Making It, who managed to raise over £16,000 with his charity live streams over this weekend.
Fantastic.
Huge amount of money. It's all going to the befriending scheme, specifically for donkeys for them, for everyone to enjoy. So that's why there was some joking about donkeys with Dave last week. Or the week
How many donkeys can they get for 16 grand? I mean,
I think it's sort of £2,000 to £3,000 a donkey, something like that.
You've got to maintain them as well, right? You've got to get them through their MOT and stuff. So.
You need the field, you need the stable, you need the manger, everything that goes with donkeys. Yeah,
a lot to do with donkeys.
Yeah. And as part of this stream, there was the Clash of the Mugs. So a lot of this was based around eBay auctions, restored PCs, and some lower effort items as well, such as mugs. So there was a special edition Donkey This Week in Retro mug where our heads were replaced by donkeys.
That's awesome.
And that went up against a More Fun Making It mug. Okay, just a standard coffee mug, 11-ounce mug. Our mug sold for £209.99. Just beating Lee's mug at £205. So we were the winners.
There's some mugs out. I mean, that's great.
Yeah. Of course, the real winners were the charity who got £415 from 2 mugs. Ridiculous.
Far out.
And if you think that's mad, I donated, I'm a generous guy, Chris. I donated an Amiga A520 TV modulator to the cause.
No, that's a good thing, right? There's people out there who don't have one.
And that sold for £150. Absolutely insane. So, if you think this retro hobby is getting expensive and out of hand, then £565 for 2 mugs and an A520, there's your proof.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously, huge congratulations to Lee. Yeah, he still has a few more tricks up his sleeve. I'm going to do something with him, which we'll reveal soon to try and raise that. We might get, who knows, dare to dream, we might get close to 20 grand, with the extra projects that he's got going for his donkeys, gold-plated donkeys. And you were involved as well, weren't you, Chris?
I was, to a degree. It's the first time I've been involved, and to be honest, I'll out myself. I didn't know what the heck was going on because I've not really followed it before, right? And it's a great cause. It's fantastic, and I love the way he's done this and involved the whole community. But I was sort of surprised that I was even invited, but it happened to fall on the same day that we had a Perth Amiga user group meet. So what I was able to contribute was basically just letting our community know what was going on and what the cause was, putting the Just Giving link up on our page, and also letting them know that we were going to connect live to this live stream as part of the event. So I ran around at one point with my phone. It was brief, but basically showed everybody watching the live stream during the Aussie hour, as I think he called it, what was going on at the Perth Amiga users group. So that was pretty cool. But I'm glad you've talked about how much mugs went for, because I wasn't very well prepared. I didn't have anything to auction because, to be honest, I don't have many spare items in my collection anyway. But now you've made me think, if you can get that much money just for a mug, like, what do I sell? Just sell a random SCART cable or something for some stupid amount of money, or I don't know what. But I'll certainly be better. If I'm ever invited back, I'll be better prepared for next year. Yeah, good fun. Good fun.
I think I just caught the back end of the Aussie hour because I was out with the family in the morning, and then I think when I was driving back, I just heard Jason chatting, and he rolled over into the hardware guys, said hello to Jan Beta, and then I joined them a little bit later. Yeah, it was good fun, really good fun. And of course, if you missed it, you can go back and watch it as well. Just look up More Fun Making It on YouTube. I'm sure Duncan will put the link in the show notes. Anything else retro featured in your week this week, Chris?
No, not so much this week. It was all about just prepping for Porg. So, yeah, I think we can get on with the show.
Well, tell me more about Porg, actually, before you do. That's an annual event, isn't it? I know you've spoken about it in the past.
Well, that's the exciting thing, actually. So it is an annual event simply because it takes a lot to put together. I mean, it's just a community group, right? But we try and have competitions and blah, blah, blah. And I did one thing we hadn't done before, which was to entice people to bring stuff, because if they don't bring stuff, right, it's just a bunch of guys in a room, and I'm not into that. So I actually came up with this idea based on what I've done in the past in the car community, where you have a show and shine, right? And there's a prize for the best car or whatever. We did that, but with the display table. So each display table was numbered and people could vote for their favorite display. And all I did as a prize, it was a stupid prize. It was literally just bragging rights on a certificate. And I put the wrong date on the certificate. I've since fixed that. It was a broken Commodore joystick that I spray painted gold in my very own garage to present a golden joystick, and a copy
Games
of Amiga.
Master style.
Yes. And the only decent bit of the prize was a spare copy of Amiga Addict that we had. But that happens to be, I must say, Amiga Addict issue 30. So it was a 30th celebration. And there may be an article by myself in the pages of that magazine, but it just happened to be a spare that we had. So that was cool, and that was won by a guy who basically, I'd seen this display set up before, but it was a Commodore 64. Keeping in mind it's an Amiga meet, but we won't worry about that. It was a Commodore 64 running a robot arm, and he'd set some blocks up and stuff, so you can just sit there and play with it with the joystick and pick up these blocks and restack them using the output of the C64 to control the robot arm. Fantastic.
The kind of peripheral we would all lusted after as kids, watching videos at school of factory assembly lines and giant robot arms and wanting one for ourselves, but just being completely unaffordable for ourselves. That sounds great. You described it
Lego.
You described it like a car show. In my head, I'm thinking more Village Hall. Who's grown the weirdest and wonderful vegetable award, and then going around and then just sort of pinning a rosette on someone. That's feeling.
That's pretty much what it is. And I told people, I said, you can vote for any reason. Like, we don't even want to know. It could be that you just have nostalgia for that machine, or you think the display was, historically accurate or whatever. It actually doesn't matter. I don't want to know. Just write the number down. And it was quite a nice way of doing it, because then anything can win, right? Anything can win. As soon as we're talking about Porg, I do want to thank especially Matt and Shane. They're the other admins that go, and Al, that put a lot of effort in to make these events work. And we had Chris Edwards as the remote guest, so that was fantastic, and he was very well received. Bit late, Chris. Bit late. We had to move a few things around, but actually that worked out well, because it gave us time to have a discussion with everybody that was in the room about where they want to take it. And the surprise is they're keen to have more events, not less. We pared it back to one a year because we thought otherwise people will get bored. And they're like, no, actually, if you only have one a year, that's when the interest drops off. We want more. We want at least two a year, and possibly a gaming day in between. So it's going great guns. Fantastic.
There you go. So Porg, the Perth Amiga user group, Perth in Australia, not in Scotland, of course. Check it out if you're in the area, or even further afield, because these kind of events are well worth making the trip to. Make a weekend of it. Stay away, go and enjoy it. Stand in a room full of men and assess their wonderfully shaped vegetables, aka Amigas, and watch Chris pin a rosette on them.
Yes.
Sounds good. Right, let's get into our first story.
No, wait,
Shane,
Shane's name. So
you did say Shane
and Al. I did. Okay,
you did, because when you said it, I thought that's a strong Australian name when you said it.
Do you know what? Actually, I have to throw this in, and this will make him laugh. Somebody came up to me at the show, and they said, "Is that the Shane?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "You mentioned on This Week in Retro once that you got something off your mate Shane. Is that the Shane?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, that's the Shane." He goes, "I've met the Shane." What
You've made him a celebrity.
Shane is more famous than me.
Shout out to Shane. Let's get into our stories. 30 years ago, a game I think most of us will be familiar with was released. That game was Sega Rally Championship. It's a game that I fell in love with when I first saw it at the arcades on Weymouth Seafront. Ours was a sitting cabinet. It was 2 players, so you could go head to head. And I spent plenty of my college money on that machine. For me, it felt like it was quite a big step from the impressive but textureless polygons of games like Virtua Racing, and we also had the big sitting Virtua Racing at Weymouth too. And I felt that the nature of rally driving lent itself brilliantly to the head-to-head, very physical battle that you have in that kind of racing with plenty of contact. If you're not rubbing, you're not racing. Is that how the saying goes, Chris?
I think it is. Yeah,
Something
and if
like
you're
that.
not first, you're last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention the lust-worthy choice of cars. You had the Toyota Celica, the Lancia Delta, and the Lancia Stratos was in there as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Everything about the game clicked for me. It was the graphics, the music, the wonderful engine sounds, the shouts of the co-driver. But it would have all fallen down if it didn't feel right to drive, if the mechanics didn't feel right. And it really did feel like the game nailed it. Blipping the throttle and the brake, spinning the wheel, you could really thread the car quite precisely to beat the clock to the checkpoint. Once you'd got the hang of it, I think when you first played it, you would slip into these great long power slides that lost you time, but you would slowly get the hang of it and hone your technique on it. Now, I couldn't tell you if it's a realistic rally car feel because I've never been rally car racing, only that I loved how it felt to play, and I think it holds up incredibly well today. Now, what do we learn from the article on inverse.com? This was submitted by Squelch411. Thank you for this. So over on Inverse, it teaches us that Tetsuya Mizuguchi produced the game, and there was a moment during development when he realized that actually nobody on the Sega Rally development team had ever driven a rally car either. And so he made it happen, and he took them away, put them all in a rally car, and they had a good drive. Okay, we should try the real deal, he's quoted as saying. You know, it's not every day you have the opportunity to go well over 100 kilometers on gravel roads, and that was a valuable experience. And the day apparently included him crashing a Toyota Celica, denting the rear end of it in. But despite that, Toyota did still sponsor the game. Now, the racing game scene at home in 1994 included things like Papyrus's system melting game, NASCAR Racing. That was really it was a great game, but I often used it to benchmark my machine. Your favorite, Chris, Club Drive on the Atari Jaguar.
Stop it.
The FMV game Mega Race featuring Lance Boyle came out that same year, and the Need for Speed got its first release on the 3DO. It would later come to other systems, but that's when it first came about. But Sega Rally, you know, over in the arcades, that managed to show us still that the arcades were a cut above what we could enjoy at home. As the home systems were catching up slowly, Sega Rally showed us there was still a reason to go to the arcade and pump our money into it. So we should say a big happy 30th birthday to Sega Rally. And Chris, were you a fan of the game? Let's chat racing games. I mean, I know you love your driving. I know you love your cars. I know you've had Alfa Romeos and Porsches and all sorts over the years. I'm guessing this is up your street.
It is absolutely up my street. Yeah, that's poignant. Yes, no, Sega Rally, definitely. I think the first time I played Sega Rally, it was quite late in the piece for me in terms of my gaming, but that's where it fits. But there was an arcade section to the local bowling alley, like a new bowling alley had been built. Yeah. And there was an arcade area there, and I remember playing Sega Rally there, two of them, you know, connected together. And what struck me about it at the time was, again, it was another game that had an H-pattern shifter, which for that period, while it had been done before, it was still quite rare. You know, a lot of games just opted for the, you know, high-low gear selection, making it accessible to the punters. But, you know, you could choose automatic gears or you could use the H-pattern shifter. And of course, that's what we did, slamming it in second as you go around a corner. I have done a half-day gravel rally track day.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, it was great fun. They had Subarus, obviously, the WRX and Evos. But I got to say, I don't think I can comment much on the realism of Sega Rally because, A, that event was way after in terms of years. But also, I was probably the slowest driver there, much as I love my cars. What I've come to realize over time is I'm actually a crap driver, mate. So, I was pretty slow on the day, but it was good fun. Gravel is so, I mean, you might as well be driving on snow, right? It's so slippery.
Right, so when you play Sega Rally, the feeling is the the lack of grip, the slidiness of it, you're
definitely
sliding the car around. Did it feel anywhere close to that in the real
Yeah,
deal?
definitely.
Yeah,
you've definitely got that sliding and whatever. And I wish I'd known when I was playing games like Sega Rally and other games that we'll talk about, what I knew now about driving and driving dynamics and when to brake and when to turn in and all that, because it does improve your gameplay, which I guess is testament to these kind of games. Daytona, obviously that style and control was replicated quite well in Daytona.
Daytona was the year before. That was the first game.
Was it? So I've got my facts the wrong way around.
93.
Yeah.
And Daytona for me, still a great game because we had the 8 cabinet lineup at the same arcade. So if we could get 8 friends together, that was a huge amount of fun. But that was fun because you were bashing into each other and there were so many cars on the course at once. It didn't have quite the same slick mechanic for me. It had this weird system where if you went into a corner, it would suddenly, the back end would flick out and you'd go into sort of drift mode with Daytona, which felt fun but unrealistic to me.
You could kind of instigate a drift. If you tried to go around it, you'd understeer, but you could, I think you slam it in second or whatever, and then you go into a drift, which I quite liked on turn 3 it was, with Sonic on the wall. But I mean, let's face it, they're two completely different racing styles, and hence they're two completely different racing games, with obviously, Sega Rally being rally, still the most dangerous form of motorsport, and Daytona replicating NASCAR, which is just going round and round an oval, and now we've lost all our American patrons.
I did read from the development team that they described choosing rally driving and making a rally driving game as quite... Well, they use the word taboo in Japan. I don't think they mean taboo. I think maybe they just mean it just wasn't a popular sport. There was no reason for them to chase that unless they thought to the international audience. But it wasn't the natural first choice for a genre of racing game when they chose it.
I can understand that because as a spectator sport, we actually have a tarmac rally right here on my back doorstep every year, and I just go to watch the staging area. I have been to some of the corners before, some of the more interesting stages, but what do you get to see? You get to see a car zoom past on the same corner, and then another car, then another car, whereas obviously track circuit-based, and especially things like NASCAR, from a spectator perspective, are much more engaging because they're going round and round, and you can be there to see it all. Other games that spring to mind for me, Hard Driving, which obviously predates both of these. But at the time, you have to think about it in the context of the time. It was quite mind-blowing, even though it was flat shade. Bit dodgy physics, but it had, from a driver's perspective, it had an H pattern shifter. It even had a clutch, and that really hasn't been replicated in much I can think about it since.
Maybe F355 challenge, but that's it.
Yep. And you even had a key to start. Obviously it was stuck in situ, but you had to turn the car on correctly, otherwise it would stall. And I can't think of a single game that's gone to that depth. So it's quite a good simulator.
Yeah, if we're going back as far as Hard Driving, the wow factor there, as much as anything, was, it's 3D. This is not scaled 2D sprites. We're going back to that era, aren't we? Yeah.
Well, I literally remember seeing Hard Driving in the same arcade as a sit-down Spy Hunter cab. So, a lot happened in those years, right? A lot. So, yeah, it was cool. But Sega Rally and Daytona, and I have to throw in Ridge Racer. I think they were a great balance in that era of realism, in inverted commas, versus fun. And I think that's important in an arcade game or even in a home port. And games that it then makes me think about, I played a lot of games, and I know you have as well, Neil, but a lot of driving games. But when you get into things like Gran Turismo and later Forza titles and Project Cars, and even real simulators in inverted commas like iRacing, I enjoy them, but then I've got to the point with them where I think you might as well just get in your car and go for a drive, right? Especially if you've got a local track to hit up. But even if you haven't and you've got some nice twisty local roads that you can approach safely and legally and still have some fun, you might as well do that. And that's where I've leaned away from those style of games, and I'd rather play an arcade racer than a racing simulator. So
okay. Well, there's Chris's advice there. Look, don't fire up your console and race your Enzo Ferrari on there. Just get your Enzo Ferrari out of your garage and take it to the local racetrack, because we've all got one, right?
We can all do that. We can all. Actually, do you know what? This is okay. The timing is a bit awkward on this, because I've literally just put my car in the garage. I'm up for 10,000 Australian dollars.
Oh, have you?
On my car.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah,
just because
on.
You've been neglecting it, or because you've been abusing it when you drive
It's just reached that age. So it's needed a new fuel tank, which I mentioned ages ago, and I haven't had it done. I've just not been filling it up all the way so that it doesn't smell of fuel. Very dangerous. And so now that needs doing. A water pump needs replacing, and it needs a major service.
Yeah.
And that cost is without the new tyres that it also needs.
Oh,
so
and
anyway, let's move on. Of course,
half that cost is Roo shoes. £5,000 of Roo shoes.
£5,000 of Roo shoes.
Some fun facts for you about Sega Rally. Kenji Sasaki, he was a former Namco employee who actually worked on Ridge Racer, and he was then the director of Sega Rally. So there's some nice crossover there, because you mentioned Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer falls into that drifting style again. A better mechanic, I think, than Daytona as a driver. Obviously, again, Daytona I love because of the huge multiplayer nature of it. But Ridge Racer, quite fun to figure out the drifting and hone your skills. Sega Rally was developed on Sega's Model 2A hardware. So you had the 2, and then you had various revisions over the years. So the first revision was 2A, which was also used for... the original was used for Daytona USA and Virtua Cop. And then the 2A was used for Virtua Fighter 2, Dead or Alive, Dynamite Cop, which was the unlicensed sequel to Die Hard Arcade. They didn't keep the movie sequel license for the sequel, and various other games as well. So Sega Rally sort of sits with those. The main CPU was an Intel i960, which was a RISC-based processor, and ended up becoming very popular in the embedded microcontroller market. And Yu Suzuki, we know that name, who led the development of the Model 2 hardware, said that the texture mapping chip originated from Lockheed Martin, who told them it would cost $2 million for the chip. It was part of flight sim equipment, and that whole flight sim, if you wanted to buy the whole thing, was $32 million. And Suzuki told Lockheed that, yeah, that's nice, but we need to get the chip price down to $50 per unit if we're going to use this thing in video games. And they managed to do it. So that, I think that speaks more about the aerospace industry's pricing of things than the actual cost of the silicon. They got it down from $2 million to $50.
So they suddenly realized it wasn't a government contract. What happened.
If you want to know more about Sega Rally, there's actually a 4-hour documentary on the game by YouTuber Pandemonium. And everyone's raving about that if you look at the comments on that video. So it will tell you just about anything you want to know about it, as well as showing lots of great vintage rally footage. So go and check that out. My own history with racing games, you've mentioned a few that you played before Sega. Sega Rally, it did make it to the PC, where I played it a lot when it came out. It took a couple of years, but I was quite impressed with Sega to because this was when they were making the Saturn and then the Dreamcast, so they hadn't fallen out of the hardware industry, but they didn't keep it an exclusive. They released it on the PC. They let us play it. Our GPUs of the time supported it, or you could play it in software mode. Likewise for Virtua Fighter, likewise for Daytona came along as well. So fair play to Sega for sharing those games with us on our PCs. But yeah, I've had quite a history of racing games, from the 2D ones, Outrun, to Stunt Car Racer, to Indianapolis 500, to F1 GP, Lombard RSC, Network Q. Colin McRae was probably the first rally game post Sega Rally that made me go, okay, this is not better because it was different, but more in depth. This gives me something meatier to enjoy, alongside Toka. Can I put Carmageddon in my list of racing games?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Project Gotham. And then the last one that I got really, really hooked on, and it's still current now, was LFS, or Live for Speed.
I remember
which that. Kind of, I think iRacing kind of took the crown for sim racing, but that was quite fun. And one that I never played, but everyone seems to praise, so I really should, was Grand Prix Legends. Did you ever try that? That was sort of the 1930s 1940s Grand Prix racing game.
Not tried that. I'll throw in there. I mean, my history is very similar to yours. Screamer 2.
Oh,
Did
Screamer
you play
2.
That? So
Screamer,
in
yeah.
the context of Sega Rally, Screamer 2 is a fantastic and quite similar game.
Well, you had Screamer Rally, which I didn't have, but I had Screamer 2, and that supported 3DFX at the time.
Yeah, it did. That was a fantastic game.
Banging
That was a really good
soundtrack.
game.
Yeah, really good game.
But yeah, Grand Prix, that makes me think of some of the, no, not early, late Codemasters titles. Codemasters, did it go under a different title for the rest of the world? For us, it was called V8 Supercars. I think it might have gone under the guise of something else, but that had a lot of different race. Even though it was called V8 Supercars, which is a racing series over here, the game itself actually had like truck racing, it had touring car racing, it had Formula One and open wheelers and all of that, and it was arcadey enough to be fun, but also leaning towards the simulator edge. It was a really good balance. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look up the cover of it to see. Twin Turbo V8 is the one I was thinking of. No, it wasn't that. So
no, it wasn't that. That
was 8-bit days.
Game.
You're talking about a newer game.
That's terrible. Yeah, no, the game I'm talking about is Xbox, the original Xbox era.
Oh, okay.
But it's a cracking game. Sega GT as well. I don't know if you played that.
Yeah, that was in the arcade. Now, when I was going to put my money into an arcade, if I had the feeling that I need to learn the track to actually get good at this game, and that's going to involve lots of money, I would shy away from it. And that was another beauty of Sega Rally, was that co-driver added so much to it. It was telling you what corner was coming up, what turning was coming up. Yes, you had to play it more to get better at it, but that eased you into it as well. Despite the fact that they would shout maybe, which I'm not sure how useful that was. Easy, right? Maybe?
Yeah. Pace notes are king.
Good. So join me, everyone, in wishing Sega Rally Championship a happy birthday. Check out that documentary, which Duncan will link to if you want to find out more about Sega Rally. And maybe share your memories of the game over on our subreddit. Take part at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Time now to thank our sponsors for this week, who are PCBWay.com. And I was browsing their website today, Chris, and we've talked about the shared projects before, but I've noticed there's a dedicated category now. So if you go to PCBWay.com, you click on shared projects, you click on the category drop-down box, and there is a category called Retro Stuffs.
Oh,
retro stuffs. And if you go into retro stuffs, you can find projects that you can just ship to yourself at the click of a button. So in there are things like Super Nintendo game cart PCBs, so you could flash your own ROMs and pop them on there. Full C64 replica motherboards. I saw an Amiga to VGA adapter, a composite mod board for a Mattel Aquarius. This is the beauty of it. It can be as niche as you want. People just upload their projects up there to make it nice and easy for you to order. There was a synth board based on the Sega YM sound chip from the Mega Drive, so you could plug that into a MIDI keyboard and sound like a Mega Drive. A 3D printed case to turn an Amiga 600 into a desktop form factor machine.
Ooh.
If you wanted to.
That's new.
And pages and pages and pages more of retro projects. So check out PCBWay.com, look in there, retro stuffs, and see if there's anything that you fancy. Thank you to PCBWay.com for supporting the show.
You know, it has to start with nostalgia for me now. For me, in terms of the next story, it's how I roll. It's right. The reason I do anything. But where you might think I've gone a bit too far with nostalgia as a justification is when I say the following sentence. You ready?
Go on, hit me.
I have fond memories of playing Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga. Stop wincing.
I knew Amiga was coming because I knew you're an Amiga man, and I was like, as soon as you said Street Fighter 2, I was like, not on the Amiga. I know.
No, it is.
I preferred it when you said you didn't play games.
Look, stop it. I never said that. That's what everybody else said, and I corrected them with a long list. Anyway, it's true, though. It was the first home port I'd played, and it was before I jumped to the SNES. Well, before I jumped to the SNES, in fact. And it was a gift that my nephew Sammy had got that Christmas. So the fond memory is actually playing Street Fighter 2 on his Amiga, which we've recently re-fired up, by the way, UK trip. Fantastic. The same machine. But it was playing on his Amiga in his room during a New Year's Eve party and everything that goes along with that season and those memories. And it was just great fun. I mean, yes, you have the disc swapping, and yes, you have to mash the keyboard to try and get any moves worth doing, but it was playable.
Can you? I had this, but I can't remember. Can you remember how many discs it was? Was it like 6 discs or something?
I think it was 5. I've got 5 in my head. I don't know why. I actually should know because I actually burnt, that's not the right term, but I'll use it, a bunch of discs for when I went over there because I knew I was going to help him get his old Amiga up and running. And I wanted to make sure he had every game that we had fond memories of playing ready to go. So I actually took all the discs back to the UK with me as well.
Okay.
So I think it was 4 or 5.
It's 4. I've just looked it up. It was 4 for Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga and on the Atari ST. And then later there was Super Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga, which was 7 discs.
That's why you had 7 in your head then. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, I liked it. The sprites replicated the arcade pleasantly, I'd say quite well, and they did their best. And the music was fine as well. Good on you, Paula. And there are some small compromises, such as the fact that the background isn't parallax and loses that sort of 3D effect of the arcade original as it scrolls side to side. We can't ignore the bad, and the frame rate does chug quite a bit. And we have to mention again the very complex and awkward controls. I can't even remember how we made it work. Just that half the keyboard was mine, half the keyboard was his, and we both also had a joystick, and I don't even know how we did it. I think you just settled for a move that worked enough to win the bout is what you did, and you just did that one move for whatever character you'd chosen.
Well, we have to think back to a couple of shows back when we were talking about gaming innovations, Chris, the top 10 list of innovations. So I guess FPS hadn't been invented by that point. And good games, we hadn't had those 2 innovations yet.
We hadn't had good games at this point. No, it didn't exist. No good games existed until Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga. Anyway, I'm actually going to forgive the disc swapping because it's not like it actually interrupts an actual fight. That would be a pain, right? But it only happens between levels, so that's fine. It's a challenging game for the 16-bit Amiga, so it may surprise you that a possibly better version is being worked on for the 8-bit Commodore 64. There's a link to a story on C64 Universe shared with us by Squelch411, which details a work-in-progress build of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the C64, including a gameplay video, and it looks great. The frame rate is smooth and the action is fast, and the compromises made, in my view, are the right ones. They're not trying to be arcade perfect. They're rather aiming to keep the game playable. The backgrounds are static, doesn't scroll at all. Who cares? And because of that, it actually quite reminds me of one of my favorite 8-bit fighters, Yi Ar Kung Fu, in a way, it was great on the Spectrum, but I've got to admit it's lightning fast on the Commodore 64. What do you think, Neil, about this effort, but also fighting games on the 8-bit micros in general?
Yeah, you were just mentioning the backgrounds there, and it's quite interesting because there's static backgrounds, and it's like a strip of Street Fighter 2 background, and the characters can actually, when they jump, you'll notice they jump above the background into the black area, which gives it an almost kind of comic book strip feel, which is nice. It's like they're in front of a comic strip. I like that.
Cool.
Street Fighter 2 without 6 buttons is not Street Fighter 2. That's
so true.
That's what I'm thinking. And it was so frustrating back in the day when I'd go to my Super Nintendo owning friends' houses. We'd play Street Fighter 2, instant loading on the cartridge, 6 buttons on the pad. It was a great, great game to play, as close to arcade perfect as you could get at the time at home. And then you'd come back and you'd look at your Amiga 500 and you'd go, look, this has got a powerful CPU in there. You know, when you put it head to head with the SNES, it's got all these custom chips. It should be capable. And, you know, it is. It can come close, but you've got that loading. You've got that disk swapping. I shouldn't have to spend another £200 on a hard drive to get close to the Super Nintendo. That's the cost of a Super Nintendo itself. And I always wondered if I could have got it as a cartridge version for my Amiga, how would that have felt? You'd still have needed the 6-button joystick. The Amiga just wasn't made for it, I don't think.
You've raised a very good point, because let's face it, the humble C64 had a cartridge slot.
Yeah.
The Amiga did not. So,
No,
and that is a bit of a game changer.
I have read about, it may have been US Gold, maybe in Epics, I can't remember. I was reading an article in New Computer Express from the 80s or early 90s recently. And one week there was mention of this company were formulating Amiga cartridge-based games, and it was in the context of piracy and trying to overcome that and game loading speeds. And then, funnily enough, I think the next week there was pretty much the same story coming from Atari. They were hitting back going, yeah, we're going to do cartridge games. And the Atari ST did actually have a cartridge slot. So, yeah, I guess with the Amiga 500, you would have had to put something on the side expansion that would then let you put cartridges in. Otherwise, you're going to wear out the side connector, aren't you?
That's true. Yeah. Be the only way around it. Yeah.
But now we've got WHD load, so, and solid state solutions, so we can kind of get a feel. I've never tried Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga with a hard drive, actually, just to see if it changes the feel of the whole thing. Anyway, I shouldn't be getting hooked up on the Amiga. This is about a C64 release, isn't it? And one-on-one fighters were never a strong point of the Amiga.
I'm never going to stop you.
Which is why I would always default back to, on the Amiga, IK Plus, which goes back to the 8-bit machines and the C64 and plays just as well on those machines as it does on the Amiga, because it was a fighter that was made with home computers in mind and a one-button joystick. It wasn't trying to fudge 6 buttons down to 1. There's no denying, I think, the brilliance of Street Fighter 2. We just put a dedicated Street Fighter 2 arcade machine in the arcade archive a couple of weeks back. Obviously, it's hugely popular. It plays brilliantly. It's as great as ever. But if we're talking guilty pleasures, as you have been, the Amiga port and the arcade, I would play of Pit Fighter.
Oh, okay.
Come on, you're an Atari man. You should be defending that. I know it's awful. I know it's awful.
Just because I bought a 2600 for them.
You've got a massive picture of an Atari behind you on the big screen.
That's one of my latest acquisitions, the unboxed Vader, which I absolutely love. I have to confess, but yeah. Yeah, but Pit Fighter. I mean, the cool thing about Pit Fighter, right, was the photorealistic in inverted commas graphics.
Yes, it was all digitized, wasn't it?
Pre Mortal Kombat, am I right?
Oh yeah, pre Mortal Kombat. Yeah.
So that's
and you had quite a big
innovative
arena to sort of march around in.
Yeah,
that's as far as I'm going to go in defending it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a hard. I totally agree. Much as when somebody says the Amiga only had one button, I will scream up and down and go, "No, it friggin' didn't," because you got an entire keyboard. But that is genuinely from the perspective of a flight sim enthusiast, right? So that works when you're playing a fast-paced arcade beat 'em up. It does not. it so does not work, right? So. What it makes me think about, and I mean, this is a story about a Commodore 64 port, so let's talk about it in 8-bit, sort of context. I really like the control methods of things like Yi Ar Kung Fu, which I've mentioned before, and also Barbarian. It did the same thing, where it literally turns a 1-button joystick into an 8-button joystick. Because what it does is, if you're not holding the fire button down, then the directions do one thing. And if you're holding the fire button down, then each direction, including the diagonals, the combos, if you want to call it that, because it's, up and left at the same time or whatever, they do something completely different. So you've literally got 8 new buttons simply through the motion of holding one button down. Wouldn't be so easy to do things like a fireball or a dragon punch or a spinning bird kick and stuff like that. But it certainly opens up the opportunities and, yeah.
And it's a different style of fighting game because it becomes more like you're not thinking ahead more. It's just a very different mechanic. It's I don't want to use the term turn-based because it's certainly not turn-based, but you are thinking, right, what am I going to do on my next move?
That's true.
I'm going to do that. What am I going to do on my next move? I'm going to do that. It's not about, rapid combos and blocking like you get in Street Fighter and stringing together lots of combos and moves.
Yeah,
it's much more clunky, but it feels quite satisfying in that respect.
You're right, and I hadn't thought about that until you said that. I mean, and when as you were saying that, I'm thinking about Barbarian, and it is almost it is you could say it's a fast-paced, turn-based game because that's kind of, you're right. That's how your brain works while you're having a round of, and it's all about how am I going to get him into a point where I can either roll over and break his kneecaps or chop his head off, right?
Chop his head off, yeah. Just the repeated head chop. That's every turn. Chop, chop, chop.
Yeah, that's all you need to do. Just that one move. What was the Team 17? Going back to the Amiga, I know I said I wouldn't, but the Amiga, there was a Team 17 karate beat 'em up.
Oh, God, was it Brutal something?
No, it wasn't Brutal anything, but it had a really nice sort of graphic look to it. It was really nice. I can never remember the name. There was a
guy with a hat on that
game.
was a complete rip-off of Terry Bogart or whatever his name is.
It probably was. It was
Body Blows. Body Blows.
Was it Body Blows? No,
yeah.
Body Blows isn't the one. It was pre-Body Blows.
Oh, you mean the karate one that had like the nice motion captured karate guy on the title screen?
I can't remember what it was. Full Contact, that's it. It was a gorgeous looking game, but what ruined it was when I realized, which my brother hated, when I realized that if you just did the roundhouse over and over again, you were guaranteed a win because the other character would get up straight into the next roundhouse kick, right? Nice. I swear that, instigating a punch, an actual punch in the face from my brother, which occasionally happened when I was thrashing him at a game. But anyway, good game.
Yeah, you had Body Blows, and then you had Body Blows Galactic, which tried to make it kind of futuristic-y Rise of the Robots type of thing.
Oh, don't mention that.
Let's not bring that into the conversation.
Yeah.
It's worth remembering, though, Street Fighter 2 did exist for the C64. And it was considered perhaps the worst port ever made of the game, suffering from horrendous loading times between stages, more so than the Amiga, I think. And just like you've explained, you could win basically by using one type of punch repeatedly. Yeah. There were some compromises, weren't there, though, with the 8-bit games, which you started talking about, I think, before I talked over you?
No, that's fine. Well, I think... Look, this is where we could talk forever, but we won't. It is a whole wider topic of, especially when they're bringing an arcade port to a home console or computer, what are the correct compromises? So I think from what I'm looking at in this port that they're doing for the C64, they're doing it right in terms of static background, simplification of the gameplay, and concentrating on what actually makes the game fun. And that's maybe a conversation for another time because you can expand into things like Outrun on the Amiga and blah, blah, blah. And we could go on forever on that topic. Because it is quite an art. What can fall away to make the game playable?
This new version, I think it certainly keeps the spirit of the arcade original from watching it. And the SID chip does a great job with the original tunes playing through. The title screen, I noticed, does say it was made with the Retro Fighter engine. Which I looked up. That's a project by Ed Barbos. It's been used in the past to create a port of the Neo Geo Pocket version of SNK versus Capcom for the C64. I'm assuming from the look of it, it's a port of the Neo Geo Pocket version. Maybe it's just a port of SNK versus Capcom that happens to look like the Neo Geo Pocket version because of the limitations. I don't know. But that looks great too. So the Retro Fighter engine is what's powering this thing.
See, I mean, looking back at this C64 port that they're working on, what we can't see in the video is how the controls work. But that's okay, because you can find out for yourself, because yes, you can even download the game in its current state from the link in the story. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes. Keep in mind that this is a C64 port of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, a much bigger and faster game than the original. So for me, this is competing actually not with my memory of the Amiga and Sammy's Amiga and that New Year's Eve party, but another fond memory of playing Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the SNES at a party at my mate's house on Turbo Speed 10 while drunk. Now, that was fun.
For an Amiga owner, you got invited to a lot of parties.
Oh, yeah, I did. So many. It's actually a shame. I'd like to try this out, but I actually sold my C64 on the weekend at Porg, so I can't try it. Although I do have C64 Forever, so I could try it out on that. Actually, I might do that. But if anyone has a SNES I can borrow and some K-Cider, I've got another memory I need to recreate right now.
Housekeeping time with
Neil.
is here. Have no fear. He'll keep things clear. It's housekeeping time with
Neil.
Time for housekeeping then. We need to welcome another new patron to the show. Peter, thank you so much for joining. Just the one this week, but we appreciate every single one of you for becoming twirlers. And if you'd like to support the show, head to patreon.com/thisweekinretro, where you can show your support. So before we get into Dave's briefs, even though Dave's not here, he's left his briefs for us to rummage through.
I'm quitting again.
Any corrections, updates, or reflections on recent shows? Chris, you've got the first one up here.
Yep, thanks to Gary Wright, who pointed out that due to a setting on Podbean, that This Week in Retro back catalogue wasn't fully available. So Duncan has worked his magic, and you can now listen all the way back to episode 1 on your podcast apps.
Fantastic. Pajako6502 updates us on the ridiculous saga of Winamp open sourcing, but not really open sourcing, as we discussed in a recent show. The owners have now deleted entirely the repository on GitHub after it was pointed out that they'd actually shared not only their own code, but code belonging to Microsoft and Nullsoft too. They also revised their license just before they did this to allow the forking of the project, because originally they said, oh no, you can't fork the project, which goes totally against how GitHub works. So they updated that, but they also maintained that forked versions must not be distributed under any means. It was all very odd. And the end result is that they have now shared their source code with the world. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle, and just made a bad name for themselves, really. The grand idea that Dave suspected was that they had an idea of getting others to work for free, basically, in doing this. That's how it all felt, and it has backfired spectacularly.
The next update is titled Female Guests, and I'm always in favour of more females. It's the title of a post from Christoph YDU, who has a discussion about if we can get more female guests on the show. And the simple answer to that is yes, of course. There's a good selection of suggestions in the post, but, chip in. Do feel free to take a look and add anyone that you'd like to see join us for a show, and we'll reach out for future bookings.
Yeah, there's a good discussion in there, and as someone points out in that show, we don't really have guests in the way that we don't interview guests. If you want that, go and listen to the wonderful Retro Hour for some good in-depth interviews. We kind of have guest hosts that just join in, share their opinions with us. So whoever you think you'd like to hear the opinion of as we talk about the week's news stories, go and chip in at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Time now for Dave's briefs. So these are the stories that we aren't covering in full detail, but we think are worth raising. So please do have a look through these, and also just use our subreddit as a place to catch up on your retro news daily, see what's going on, and share and submit your news for everyone else to enjoy. First one I picked out was that there is a Christmas gaming weekend taking place in Norfolk from the 30th of November to the 1st of December at the Black Swan Pub. The Black Swan Pub.
I'll go to either.
I not say pub?
I'll go to either. I don't care.
The Black Swan Pub in North Walsham. It's featuring DJ Hoffman. He gets about a bit, doesn't he, with his A600s? So check that out if you're in the area. Links in the show notes.
Nice. I met Hoffman. Good bloke. 42 Nobody 42 shares that Atari. I'm laughing at this because... Yeah, Atari have released a branded decanter and glasses because nothing says legendary video games company like a joystick-shaped decanter full of whiskey. And the reason why I'm laughing, Neil, is because I saw this on Facebook and I actually linked Nikki to it because she'd only just bought me a decanter for my upcoming 50th birthday. Right. And it was just like, oh no. I know you've just bought me one, but now I've spotted this because I would 100% buy that. That is freaking
You're the
awesome.
first person I thought of when I saw it, I have to admit.
This is just gold. I love it. Yeah, I'd so have that.
Raise a glass, please, because Pajako6502 shares that Lillian Schwartz has passed away at the ripe age of 97. She was an American artist considered to be one of the pioneers of art with computers. We're not talking about Photoshop or even Deluxe Paint. although it said that many of her techniques were carried into some of these software packages later, because she was creating computer animated films at Bell Labs in the 1960s. I recommend a short video called The Artist, the Computer, which I'll link to in the show notes, where you can see her work, the systems that she used and the techniques, because it's really quite incredible. And it's a world of computers long before my time. And it's fascinating to see how she got the results she did with the hardware that she did.
Starcade 2084 updated us on the latest from LGR and the natural disaster that hit his area and his collection. LGR's latest video assesses the damage and walks us through what was damaged and what was thankfully survived. Go and check it out and share your words of encouragement with Clint as he faces a very different end to the year that he could have had. And I know Clint listens to the show. So, yeah, seriously, mate, we're with you all the way. If I had any wine left in my glass, I would be tipping one towards you, mate. Yeah, all the best. Keep your chin up.
And please do keep the videos coming. Just share your journey with us, Clint, because we're all there to support you. And, show us the good, show us the bad, and we're all behind you. Nintendo, who love to come down on all things emulation with an iron fist, appear to be emulating Super Nintendo games in their own official museum, shares AMCPC 464. An irony not lost on PC Gamer magazine, whose article reports that the controller in the museum appears to be USB, and the familiar ding-dong-dun of Windows can be heard if you unplug the controller when you're playing on the SNES games.
No way.
Naughty Nintendo. They need to issue themselves a cease and desist or something.
That's so funny.
There are plenty more stories like this over at reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro. So please do go and check it out. And once again, patreon.com/This Week in Retro if you'd like to support the show. Andy Davidson, the creator of the very popular Worms series of games, has been active recently on social media, sharing that the Amiga that he used, the very same one, to create the original game, has been serviced, it's been recapped, and it's back in action. Not only that, he now intends to release an update of that game. Worms was originally created by Andy for his friends to play at school. I think there's quite a famous story behind it where he also submitted it to Amiga format for a games writing competition and didn't win. Bizarre, isn't it? When you think about the success of the game, Amiga format took a look and went, that's not enough. It was inspired by artillery games before it, such as Scorched Earth. His original creation, I can't remember if it was written in Amos. I think it was Blitz Basic, maybe. He wrote it in originally, and it featured lemmings. So he just used some artwork from lemmings to make a game for his school friends to enjoy. But when people started skipping lessons to play it, it was soon banned from the school. And that was the indication he needed to tell him that he was onto something here. And he rejigged it with Worms characters instead of lemmings before presenting it to Team 17, who became the lucky publishers. Now, there's even a little bit of this Worms history in the cave, because I've got on display in the dev den now the original little boombox stereo that Andy used. He borrowed it from his friend who kept it and has now loaned it to me. And it was used by Andy to record his voice and then sample it into the Amiga using the little EQ on the front to get some nice, funny sounded voices. And that's where the little Worms taunts come from. So if you come to the cave, you can see the actual boombox that the Worms.
Fantastic.
Come on then. Those voices were recorded on.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, the update that Andy's working on is the Worms Director's Cut, or DC 1.5. And he's called on the help of demo groups, the wonderful creative world of the Amiga demo scene. He's invited them to submit their own Worms levels, branded if they like with the group's name, so they can give themselves kudos. You might even see some greets hidden in the menus to other demo groups, maybe some insults chucked in Worms levels at other demo groups. You never know. And the best ones will be compiled, and the final Worms DC 1.5 will be released in January 2025. I'm excited to see what comes out of this, because Worms has been a game I've enjoyed since its release, and it'll be really fun to see the creativity of the demo scene. And it's really nice, I think, as well, that it's sticking to its Amiga roots, even though it's such a big game on other systems. I probably played it more on the PC than anything else, but it's nice to go back to its Amiga roots, the original Amiga, the original developer. Let's see what he comes up with. Did you have worms, Chris?
Yes. Did I have worms? Do I have worms? It's interesting that you raised this story because I literally heard about this 2 days ago. I hadn't seen it online anywhere, and I heard about it at Porg. But from my mate Byron, who was there because he runs a shop, 8-Bit Anarchy, a retro game shop, and he was there with his stall, and I was chatting away to him. Great bloke.
You're just hanging out with Byron and Shane, mate.
Hanging out with Byron and Shane. But Byron's actually in touch with Andy, obviously remotely, and so he's really into this. And he was telling me the story. He didn't tell me. He was telling me that the original dev was working on Worms again, and I didn't know the backstory. So it was one of those conversations where you go, oh, okay, that sounds interesting, nodding away thinking I need to research this when I get back to see the validity of it. But he left out the bit because it was a brief conversation about the fact that his original A1200 has come back to life, and that's what's enabled him to do this. And I love that. That is freaking awesome, the fact that this is off the back of the original kit being rebooted up, recapped, and all those backups being made available.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ties in with the latest video that I've been doing on my channel, which is Richard Costello, who was the developer of the Amiga port of Primal Rage and Mortal Kombat. He donated his old Mega ST to the cave, and I won't ruin the video because there's a lot of fun had in it in trying to restore his original dev environment and also source code. And there's an unreleased game that we found on there called Ramrod. And I would love to get Richard, and he has expressed an interest in doing this, to actually sit down at his original dev machine using his original tools and finish up that unreleased game and get it out there. Nice. I believe he's had a chat with whoever is the person to chat to, because it was developed at Gremlin Graphics originally. So technically it's not his code. He was working for someone. And the last I heard, they'd said to him, you can release it so long as it's not for profit. So that's great. There's a route there where we could get it out to the world if he, if he wants to sit down at that machine. So it'd be lovely to see that. And that's the same with Andy. It's just lovely that he's using the original hardware to do this on. Knowing how my brain works, and I don't know about you, I'm amazed that someone can sit down at a machine they haven't used for 30 years and remember how to do it. Remember how to code 68,000 assembly or whatever else. Yeah.
I can't remember what I had for lunch last week. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess maybe muscle memory and it all starts flooding back. But yeah. I don't know. I mean, the closest I can relate is when you pick up something like Shoot 'em Up, which is nothing near the level, let's face it, of assembly code and whatever. But then you go, oh, that's right. You have to do this first and that, and load these assets, and off you go. So I guess in the instance of Richard Costello, when he packed up his Mega ST and the PlayStation came along, that was it. He retired from game development and he became a racing driver instructor. So he hasn't even been touching computers. Yeah, far out. Yeah, that's crazy. In terms of Worms, I absolutely loved Worms. For me though, as an Amiga owner and lover, I have to be honest here, it was a PC game for me. I'd jumped to the PC by then, and I remember playing the demo and then later the full version to bits, both mainly with Nikki actually, both when we were first dating and then engaged and then in our early married life. It was one of the games we'd go back to because it was just fun. It was just great fun. And then much later, it's a franchise we picked up again when, we had our own kids, the twin boys, and they became old enough to start playing that kind of computer game with us. And it's one we just return to every now and again for some good family fun, even today. I have to confess, though, that we actually became, I think I've mentioned this on this show before, we became, as a family, big fans of Worms 3D on the Xbox One, as in the original Xbox, using Dave's correct Xbox numbering system of last week, which I appreciated. But yeah, that's sort of the runs to the litter, but we loved it, and I still love that rendition of Worms. But I never knew the backstory about Andy making it to play at school and using lemmings as the sprites. And that explains why this has always felt like a spiritual successor to Lemmings for me from day one. From the very first time I played that demo, I actually first thought it was made by the same people. But yeah, love it.
What came first for you, Chris? Was it Worms or Skid Marks?
I didn't really play Skid Marks that much back in the day, Neil. So Yeah, Worms.
Anyway, I was a big fan of Scorched Earth, having played that so much before Worms. So Worms, it was late in the Amiga's life, which is why we both, I think, played it more on the PC than the Amiga. And it felt like a natural progression of that genre rather than a revelation. People look back on Worms and say, it was an amazing game, which it was, but it had a lot to owe to games like Scorched Earth and artillery games before it. But it just made it more fun, made it like a much more fun genre. And it's the gameplay that doesn't feel unfair. It feels unlucky at times, but that luck can fall both ways. It rewards skill. And in recent years, we found that modern versions of it, the 2D versions, let's just forget the 3D versions existed, Chris. Modern versions of it capture pretty well that same feeling, even over the internet, if you're in a voice room and you're all chatting together, as it did back in the day with 2 of you or 3 of you or 4 of you sat at a PC. So it's a game that keeps on giving, and I'm sure this new version will. So keep an eye out for Worms DC 1.5, Chris.
We can't wrap this up without discussing favourite weapon. Go.
Well, the sheep. Yeah.
No, Fatkin Strike.
There you go. Time now for our community question of the week. And last week's question was, which game, like Chris, has aged the best? You can pick from any era, although brand new stuff might be ignored. And Duncan throws in, how about Tetris? It basically hasn't changed, but manages to keep players of all ages engaged in a way that Pong or Asteroids might not have done. Yeah, good shout, Chris. Let's see if anyone else has come up with that. So we will go to our question of the week on the subreddit where you can participate, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Dave's not here, so I don't know how to take it out of contest mode. How do I do that?
Contest mode? I don't know.
It says contest mode is enabled.
Oh, where is it? Oh, maybe I don't have access to change it because I'm not a mod.
I don't know. No, well, I'm a mod, but I don't have access to change it. Okay, well, we'll just go from the top because it seems to be...
We'll just go from the top.
We'll just go from the top. Seems to be well ordered.
How many... Hang on, 5. I'm looking at the number of... Yeah, that's fine because it's... Yeah. Number of votes is good.
So we've got Tech Made Easy UK at the top who says... Got to be Doom, right? Still relevant enough 30 years later to receive new levels. Still widely discussed in pop culture. Seminal in terms of kicking off the genre in general. To which Dogcow replies, definitely a game I was thinking about too. PS2 FPSs don't feel playable now without making remakes, but the OG Doom will forever kick its backside. Doom. I don't think there's any arguments there.
No arguments there. Happy Coding ZX. My vote goes to the classic Atari Vector games. And if it has to be one, it would be Star Wars. When I played it on original hardware, they're such a unique experience that can't really be replicated. And as such, they are marvelous today as they were in all their minimalist glory. Yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, the Vector just feels like it looks how it is supposed to look. It doesn't feel like it's limited or cut back or trying to pretend anything that it isn't. It's just beautiful, glowing, smooth lines. Yeah, love it.
Nice.
It's Tomorrow now says, I still think Gran Turismo 3 has aged unbelievably well, considering it's a 23-year-old. Is it 23 years old, Gran Turismo 3?
How old how fast are we aging? That can't be right.
No, it looks outstanding given the technological restraints of the PS2. It was the first time I saw a game in the shops and thought, wow, that looks like real life. Perhaps being one of the few instances where a retro game had a realistic ethos behind it and still ages well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about the PS2 from the time it launched to its twilight years. How much game development progressed from in the early days. It was like, oh no, we've got problems with Jaggies. We can't even anti-alias nicely, to something like Gran Turismo 3, which just looks stunning. They really did get to grips with that system.
That's true.
So those are our top 3. I mean, I've got to give a special mention to Fuskit, who says chess. After 900 years, it still has massive worldwide competitions.
Well played, sir. Well played. Checkmate, you might say.
Well done. Well done. Tungsten Orchid says Elite. Also mentions Lemmings, Monkey Island series, particularly Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. I agree. Jeff Mendoza talks about Jet Set Radio on the Dreamcast, a game that I was just playing this week on the new Heba Multipie, which you'll see in a future video. 24 years old, but of course that cel-shaded art style looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good game.
They said edit. Just realised Neil also picked out Jet Set Radio. Yeah, I did mention it. And says, sorry, Dave, I never played Ultima. Any standout for you in the list there, Chris?
No.
I can see one that stands out for you from Fourth Directive.
You got Half-Life 1 and 2. Fourth Directive. Where's the Fourth Directive? Oh, F117A Stealth Fighter on the Amiga. Well, of course. Yeah, F19, which was the first one, was the one we all played. But on the Amiga, not on the DOS port, they added the F117 anyway because suddenly it was public knowledge what a stealth fighter actually looked like, right? That literally sort of came out between the DOS release and the Amiga release, which makes them quite cool. Yeah, good game.
Sybil66 says Chucky Egg. You could give that to modern gamers for an evening and they'd still have an absolute blast getting the high score, which they do in the cave. We've always got Chucky Egg on because it's such a great game. Loads of great answers. So thank you to everyone. Oliver number 9, Sonic the Hedgehog holds up well, New Zealand Story, Generic User 7892, Legend of Zelda, Wind Waker on the GameCube. And just for Dave, a user called I Am the Dave L. Ultima. just finished replaying you 1 to 4. Is that you, Dave?
It's got to be Dave. Come on. Nobody else plays Ultima.
And that brings us to this week's question of the week. What vintage game developer would you like to dust off and recap their dev system? And what game would you like them to update for that original platform?
Good question.
So Duncan will pin that question to the subreddit one last time, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. If you'd like to chat live with all of us, come to discord.gg/RMC-retro, where there are many rooms, but there is also a This Week in Retro room, and lots of others beside where you can chat to us all. And again, if you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/thisweekinretro. Have I missed anything, Chris?
Don't think so. And it's been great to be back with you, Neil. Good fun.
Feels natural having you here, and we're hoping to see you maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, however it fits around your schedule. But it's nice to have you,
like an Amiga magazine, once every 6 months.
Chris Winters available
monthly, every day,
weekly,
once every 6 months. No, 6 weeks. No, whenever you guys need me, I'm here. You know that. It's good.
And of course, do check out Chris's channel. It's Agama 005. That's Amiga 500 backwards.
005 Agama. He's no clue.
I've got it wrong. You do. You plug
005
yourself.
Agama. I don't like plugging myself. I'm just here for the fun of it. So, but yeah, 005 Agama. Yes. If you don't want to have any actual facts and just blurred, often wrong nostalgic memories, that's what I'm about.
Chris's latest video all about how much he loves cassette tapes. Is that right?
No, that's an article I wrote for Pixel Addict.
Oh, that's the article.
No, the last one was about another failure of the Trojan Light phaser.
Of course, because you tried to bring it through customs. You got it taken away from you.
Why can't you take a gun on a plane in this day and age? I don't understand. And that's this show cancelled.
Well, to find out how that saga panned out, go and check out Chris's show. Duncan will also put a link to that in the show notes. And we'll see you next time. He's waving. He is now.
And I'm waving. We're all waving. Bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Chris from 005 Agema. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.